of trade on Wall Street. And these are the top business headlines on Thursday, September the 20th. US markets are on track to close at record levels. The Dow and the S&P both hit all-time highs earlier today. It's the Dow's first record since January. The market's been on it throughout the course of the day. It looks like we might end up the best of the day. The takeover battle for the British broadcaster Sky could be decided by auction this weekend. Regulators say Comcast and Fox must table new bids this week, and if there's no resolution, a one-day auction takes place at the weekend. And Donald Trump's blaming OPEC for high oil prices, tweeting, "The OPEC monopoly must get prices down." We'll have markets and updates throughout the course of the programme. Tonight, we are at Westminster outside on a crucial day for Brexit, where a summit's been held in Salzburg. I'm Richard Quest, and I'm in business. Tonight, Brexit is approaching a moment of truth, so says Donald Tusk, the President of the Council, as he roundly rejects Theresa May's trade proposals. The moment when Britain will leave the EU is now only 6 months away, and crucial issues remain unresolved. Both sides are digging in. So if it's a meeting in Salzburg, the President of the European Council said Theresa May has one last chance in 4 weeks' time to get it right.
Everybody shared the view that while there are positive elements in the Chequers proposal, the suggested framework for economic cooperation will not work. The moment of truth for Brexit negotiations will be the October European Council. In October, we expect maximum progress and results in the Brexit talks.
Theresa May arrived in Salzburg with high hopes for the compromise, and Tusk's statement was the moment it became clear that wouldn't happen. It's a major blow to the Prime Minister, already under siege from members of her own party. And as Donald Tusk rejected her Chequers plan, the Prime Minister insisted there's no alternative.
There is no counter-proposal on the table at the moment that actually delivers on what we need to do and respects the integrity of the United Kingdom and respects the result of the referendum. That's what we've put forward. If there is no agreement on a deal that is acceptable to the United Kingdom, then we're preparing for no deal.
So where do we actually stand? Look at the issue tracker to see where the talks are going. Now, the issues in green are the ones that are largely settled. So, for example, the order of the talks, the exit bill, the rights of the EU citizens and the length of the transition period. Now look at the ones under discussion. And there you've got the Irish border, trade and legal. The two sides are very far apart. Theresa May says she can't accept the so-called backstop plan for Northern Ireland, which would keep the North aligned with the Irish and EU rules. That, according to the British Prime Minister, would divide the UK anyway. It's unthinkable to her coalition, or at least the party, the DUP, that's keeping her in office. Donald Tusk says her plan won't work, and talks on security cooperation have not even begun. As we show you this, remember the warning the Prime Minister, Theresa May, delivered last week in Westminster.
As the EU themselves have said that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Without a deal, the position changes.
Bianca Nobilo is with me. How deep and divided is it now?
Between the EU and the UK,
yes,
or behind us?
Both.
You know
do the first.
So it's deeply, deeply divided. And it's almost surprising because last night, Donald Tusk said there was more hope but less time. So this is quite an about turn, supposedly because the Prime Minister took such an uncompromising position at their dinner last night when she had 10 minutes to persuade them round to her Chequers plan. In terms of the building behind me, even more so after the news today, we've heard from one of the leading Brexiteers, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He says, well, now Chequers has no friends because obviously Brexiteers didn't want it, and now he says the EU doesn't even want it. That was supposed to be the selling point of Chequers.
So when Emmanuel Macron comes along and says that the whole thing is falling apart, the lies he's called it, we should take this seriously.
We should, and the point that Macron was trying to make, and it's a point that EU have been trying to make all along, is that this process of leaving the EU is an agonising one. It's not as easy as the Brexiteers tried to make out in the referendum campaign. Clearly, that is a message the EU wants to get across.
But how realistic is it, then, that they're going to be able to solve this by the October Special Council, which Donald Tusk has called.
It looks unlikely now. I mean, they have this emergency summit they've mentioned, which is going to be on the 17th, 18th of November. It's possible they could fudge it, but there's increasing concern in the building behind us and also across Britain of a blind Brexit, this notion that we'll be signing up to Brexit but won't know what will happen after March the 29th, 2019. They won't know what the future relationship is going to look like. So they can try and fudge it with the EU, but if people in the UK are getting more sensitive to the idea of not knowing what a Brexit will look like, how will that fudge get through?
Is it your feeling that the position in Europe has hardened, that the EU has hardened its case to the point where, listening to Macron today and others, it's almost as if they are saying, look, if you can't come up with something better, then a no Brexit deal, it'll hurt us all, but it'll hurt you more than us.
That is what they're saying. And in fact, Juncker said that today. He said, we're prepared for no deal. Don't worry, be happy, were his words. But yes, it looks more and more divided by the day. And in fact, Theresa May needs to be incredibly concerned about this because of the fractured state of her own party. And that's why the EU can take such a hard line, because they're speaking with one voice. They're not in there.
In a moment, I'm talking to Lord Lamont. What should I ask him?
I think you need to ask him about what the potential solution is to the Northern Irish problem. That is the problem, the sticking point, which is holding back negotiations. And he'll be able to talk to you all about the issues with customs and the issues with the single market. No one better.
Stay close by and you'll hear what he has to say. The French President Emmanuel Macron has launched an extraordinary attack on Brexit. He says those who told the public that Brexit would be easy are liars and described the Chequers plan as unacceptable. He had this message for those who think it's going to be fine.
The Brexit teaches us something, and I completely respect British sovereignty when I say that it showed that those who say that we can easily live without Europe, that everything is going to be all right, and that it's going to bring in a lot of money, are liars.
Lord Norman Lamont is a former Conservative finance minister and a Brexiteer. Good to see you. Let's start with answering Bianca's question. What is your alternative solution? If Chequers isn't a good solution for Northern Ireland, what's your preference?
Well, I think it's right to say that the Irish border is the key question. Actually, I think it's a bit of a non-problem. They've made it into a problem tactically because the way in which they framed it would make it insoluble. But if they mean what they say, it would be, I think, comparatively easy to have a decentralized regime of inspections, of alignment, away from the border. Barnier himself has said that he wants the border to be in the North Sea as a part of the backstop, but they would be very light. Well, if it can be very light in the middle of the North Sea, why can't it be very light on the Irish border? I think one has to distinguish between a hard border and no border at all.
The Prime Minister doesn't agree with you on that. She points out it doesn't matter whether the border is in the heart of Northern Ireland or it's on the border itself. Any form of checks would be, by definition, creation of a hard border with a light touch.
Well, we already have, as you know, checks on the Irish border. There are checks on VAT, checks on excise duty. We have different currencies. They're not literally carried out on the border, although you can see cars stopped. You can watch them on Facebook, cars being stopped on the border and inland. Now, the point is that an awful lot of customs inspections take place at the point of departure, in the warehouse. They don't take place at the border. So I do think that we have to concede there would be some checks, just as there are now.
How far are the hard Brexiteers prepared to push this? If Chequers or some version thereof comes out of the next month's summit meeting, will they vote it down in Parliament? Because that's really where it all happens now.
Well, I think if they were going to vote it all down, and I'm a pretty hardline Brexiteer, you have to ask what happens next. And I'm not sure that it's as simple as saying we're out, and there's no agreement, and we're on WTO terms. I think there would be a lot of manoeuvring, and you wouldn't get there in one go.
No, but Emmanuel Macron today, and I say this with due respect since I'm saying it to your face, called hardline Brexiteers liars, in that you had implied and given the impression that it was going to be easier than it has been to get a settlement, get an agreement that would and to leave the EU?
Well, I think the word liar is completely inappropriate. You can criticise some things that were said on both sides. The issue of it's difficult versus it's easy was not really an issue in the referendum campaign. The issues were about what would the budget contribution be, what would we gain from it. Those were the arguments. Macron is talking nonsense.
Coming back to this idea of voting down the bill, obviously it depends what it looks like, and if it is, but if it is a version of Chequers, which does have some form of alignment with, the north to the south, will follow a common set of a common rule book. Can you live with that?
Well, I think the thing that is difficult is the customs arrangements. That I don't think is easy to accept. And I don't think it's very easy for the EU to accept that you would have British officials raising taxes for the EU.
Right, but I'm not. But we'll let them worry.
That's part of it.
Right, but I'm talking about. But at the end of the day, this thing lives or dies by how the people vote behind me in Parliament.
But I'm saying I don't think they would easily accept that, and I don't think so I think Chequers will have to be significantly altered one way or the other. And I think you will. I mean, there are all sorts of hybrid versions, but I think they'll have to move a bit more towards Canada plus. But can I just say this? I don't think this is the end of the road. Honestly, I wasn't surprised at all. I always said from the beginning, oh, there'll be a walkout. It'll break down. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't break down again in October, and then we go right to November, and maybe beyond November. This was always going to happen. But, you know, the idea that this is going to be immensely damaging to us and not hurt them if there is no deal. First of all, I think that's nonsense, medium term. But the economies that would really suffer would be Holland, Ireland, Denmark, Germany. They would be really badly affected, and they don't want that.
So on this point of how the negotiations would go, you sat through more EU meetings than I suspect you ever wish you'd had to.
Absolutely.
In your days. And negotiations during those heady days around Black Monday and around there. What does happen right at the end?
Well, I think Europeans tend to maintain a very united front, and then actually the real negotiation begins at the very end. Don't forget this. There's one crucial thing. The agreement is going to be two bits, a significant withdrawal agreement and probably a rather vague trade agreement.
Can you live with that?
Yeah. But the point is, they won't get any money if there's no agreement, and they are desperate for the money.
Thank you for coming out this evening.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed, Lord Wanted. And so to Wall Street, where the Dow and the S&P are on track to close at records in less than an hour's time. Both hit all-time highs earlier in the session. It'll be the Dow's 100th record close since President Trump's election, and, however, the first since January. Paul Monica is tracking the numbers in New York. As you look at the numbers, Paul, what's driven it today?
Yeah, I think you had solid economic numbers, a drop in jobless claims that has people excited about the prospect for the U.S. economy continuing to show steady and solid growth. And then Apple, this is a stock. We were ready for the new iPhones. People are going to be able to get them, and Apple stock rebounding as well. That, of course, helps lift the Dow, which is price weighted. So there's just optimism about corporate America, corporate earnings, and the steady as she goes U.S. economy. And I think people are looking at that more than trade war fears with China right now.
I mean, if we just look at the Dow 30, which we're showing on the screen, only one stock in the red. Peter Tuchman at the exchange made it clear he was still very buoyant.
The fundamentals of the market are strong. Whatever happens with elections and what happens with China is that negative narrative is being disengaged. I've often talked to you about it, that what goes on in Washington and what goes on in the stock market don't often go in concert. Sometimes they just go separate directions. And I think that's what you're seeing here.
Yeah, I think...
And so, if that's true... So, no, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say the one thing that I think, where Peter makes a great point, that right now the markets, I think, are ignoring a lot of the trade rhetoric and the Trump tweets. The one thing that could come into play, those midterm elections in a few weeks, if more Democrats gain control, in the House and the Senate, that could potentially unnerve Wall Street a little bit, because I think any thought that Democrats have more power in the House and Senate, even though that means more gridlock, it might also mean maybe that the chances of the Democrats winning in 2020 as well would be higher. And I think that might be a scenario where Wall Street wouldn't be too thrilled. But we're still a few weeks away from that, obviously.
We are indeed, and we shall hold our breaths and wait and watch. Paul and Monica, thank you. Now, a rally in US stocks, and it was followed by, or rather, it followed a similar pattern that started in Europe. All the major markets closed higher. The greatest gains, they were seen in Paris. Emmanuel Macron is having a very good run with the market. Even the FTSE was up by 0.5%. Britain's Prime Minister insists there'll be no second referendum on leaving the EU. Some people think she is wrong. Gina Miller, for example, who took the UK to court over Brexit. Gina Miller will be with me in a moment. And please get your phones ready, or your laptops, or your iPhone, your iPads, whatever you've got. Now, we want you to weigh in. Should Britons be allowed to turn back the clock to June the 23rd, 2016? CNN.com/join and get your phones ready.